Okay, so now we've done the introduction to what an eyewitness testimony is and the overall problems with an eyewitness testimony. We're now actually going to get stuck into our kind of like content for the examination. So your major task on this particular topic area is to assess the factors which affect the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, i.e. what factors make the eyewitness testimony inaccurate or unreliable. Now you're going to look at two specific factors which affect the accuracy. They are misleading information, which will be given after the event, and also the effect of anxiety on eyewitnesses at the time of witnessing. Now for each factor, you've got to be able to do a series of different things. Number one, you've got to be able to outline the factor and say how specifically it affects the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. And then more importantly, you've got to be able to outline the research into the factor, which is probably the biggest bit, and then evaluate that research. Now, if we just shift it forward a little bit, you'll see that there are three different questions in this area that you could be asked. Now, each one of them requires different content. So it's very, very important that you practice these questions on a regular basis on the run up to your paper one. Okay? Now, you have got to be able to remember each factor because each factor is as likely as the others to be on the exam. So don't leave any out when you are revising. Now, at this stage, if you get in front of you your big A3 sheet of paper, what I've given you is a description of the three different types of questions from this area. So in the left-hand column, you'll see that we've got outline and evaluate research into the effects of, and then one particular factor on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. That question is really nice and straightforward because it is literally describing the piece of research in all their glory and all their detail and then evaluating the research. So in there you're going to be getting credit for methodological evaluation of the research as long as making sure your points are applied. The next question that you might get given is outline how researchers have investigated the effects of whichever factor on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Now, some of you will already be familiar with this idea that when it's asking you how, there are no credit for talking about findings here. So you should just be trying to include aims, research method, experimental design, who were the participants, what were their stimulus materials, and what was the task in hand. The third and final question is probably the most difficult because it's asking you what research has shown. So you've got to try to build in to your answer the findings, but you can also relate some of the procedures in there, okay? So you can see here, and you can keep coming back to this, I've given you a little template of how to actually do that. So then, now without any kind of further ado, we need to move into the first factor, all right? So the first factor that we're going to be looking at is the effects of misleading information on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So the first kind of misleading information that we're going to be dealing with is basically a misleading question. So misleading information is known as incorrect information given to the eyewitness, usually post-event, so after it's occurred, which can unintentionally distort the memory of the original crime. Now, it's important that you understand that this is totally unintentional. Sometimes police officers will use these misleading questions by mistake, but post-event information normally takes two forms. We've got leading questions and then we've got post-event discussion, which we'll get onto in a little while. So on your A3 sheets, now just give me a description, okay, of what misleading information is and what its effect is, okay? So pause me right here, get that definition filled in, and then come back to me for the next little chunk. Okay, so once you've got that definition filled in there, okay, of what misleading information is, and this idea that there are misleading questions which prompt us to a specific answer, we have got our first piece of research. So the first piece of research is actually from Elizabeth Loftus. So the task here, or the aim here, was to investigate whether post-event information in the form of a leading question, which remember gives people a supposed answer, would result in an eyewitness testimony being inaccurate. So Loftus and Palmer investigated this using a lab experiment. Okay, a lot of these studies investigating misleading information are predominantly using lab experiments. So they wanted to investigate the effects of leading questions for memory of a car accident specifically. So in this study, we have 45 participants who are all students, and if you want to add it on, they were psychology students, so that might have caused problems. Those of you who know what demand characteristics are, that might come into play a little bit here. But those 45 participants were shown a film of a car accident. Now, after they've watched the film, they are placed into one of 5 different conditions, and they are asked specifically about the speed of the cars with the question, about how fast were the cars going when they something each other. One of the words was replaced. That word was a verb, okay? It's a describing word. So in each of the 5 conditions, the verb was different to describe the impact. One condition received the word smashed, next received the word collided, then bumped, then hit or contacted, okay? So we got 5 different questions here. Now, if we have a look at the findings, you can see the different speed estimates. So for the smash condition, they had a much higher speed estimate of 41 miles per hour. Then we need to compare that directly to the contacted condition, which had a lower speed estimate, okay, so lower by 9 miles per hour of 32. In terms of your exam, you need to know these 5 different words, but you only really need to know the findings, i.e. what was recorded for those 2 conditions, because from those conditions we can conclude from those findings that being exposed to a misleading question after an event has occurred can, as we presumed, distort the witness's memory for that event, okay? So that's our first piece of research from Loftus and Palmer. We're now just going to move it forward slightly, and you'll see that on the next page in your booklet you've got some research methods questions. So the first task is to plot this particular graph. Now remember from what you've been taught on data analysis that there are 6 different marks available for drawing and labelling a graph. One is available for plotting the data. Sounds ridiculous, but you only get 1 mark for getting the right bars on there. Then we need to label the x-axis. We need to scale the x, i.e. we need to mark on there the appropriate conditions. We need to label our y-axis. We need to scale that y-axis, and we need to give a title which refers to both the IV and the DV, okay? So again, you need to pause me here and you need to have a go now at drawing that graph, okay? Okay, so notice that I haven't actually given you the answer to this question. In your lesson, when you come back after half term and it's being assessed, this is one of the things that your teacher will be assessing for you, okay, to see whether or not you've correctly produced that particular graph and making sure you've done all of these 6 things. So now we can move on to the next research methods question. You can see that this question asks you to identify the experimental design used by Loftus. So you need to decide, is it one group of participants completing all the different conditions, so is it a repeated measures design, or is it 5 different groups who complete a separate condition each, in which case it's independent. So everybody now write an answer in there. Then for question 3, we've got to identify the IV and the DV in the Loftus study. Now, to do this, you need to remember that the IV is the variable that creates the two conditions, okay? So it's the one that is manipulated. So what is manipulated between these different groups, based on what I've just said to you, that is classed as the IV, okay? The DV, on the other hand, is what is specifically being recorded or measured. So in this case, what was the specific difference between each of the 5 groups and what was recorded for each? Again, I'm not giving you an answer, so you need to make sure that your own answers are written in at this point before we move forward. Okay, so now we've finished those couple of quick research methods questions, we're on to the second type of misleading information. We know that the first type of misleading information is known as a misleading question, and it can unintentionally provide to a witness a specific answer. The second type of misleading information is known as post-event discussion, or PED. Now, this occurs when there is more than one witness to an event. Now, usually when we've witnessed an event, for example, a car accident, witnesses might discuss what they have seen with other co-witnesses, which then often has an impact on the accuracy of their recall. It lowers their accuracy because what they do is they combine this misinformation from others with their own memories. So what they think is their own memory of that event is actually a combination of what they saw and what the other witness saw. So that is known as I've already said to you, post-event discussion. Now at this point, just pause me and complete the definition of post-event information on your A3 sheets for me. Okay. So once we've got that definition in there, we now need to move on to, again, our second piece of research, okay? So the gabart study is a little bit more difficult to understand than the Loftus study. So the aim was to investigate the effects of post-event discussion on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So the method, a little bit more complex. They investigated memory conformity effects between pairs of participants who viewed a simulated crime event on video. So remember, this isn't a real crime, it's all faked, it's all simulated. It used Confederates and they're only witnessing through a video clip. Now, what it says here about memory conformity, that's just another way of saying that they converted to what their partner thought they saw. So, they're in pairs at this point in time. Participants are told that they are seeing the same footage. However, whilst they contained the same sequence of events, the two pairs' views of crime were filmed from different angles and subsequently gave two different perspectives. That means that each participant in the pair could see different elements that the other half of the pair could not. For example, one witness could read the title of a book being carried by the woman in the footage and the other one could not, okay? Now at this point, the participant pairings in the experimental condition were allowed time to discuss with their partner what they had witnessed in the video. The other condition, known as the control condition, did not discuss the research, okay? So they did not have the opportunity to discuss the events. That therefore makes it an independent measures design, because you've got one condition which is allowed to discuss, i.e. they've got PED available to them, and the other group were not allowed to do that. So now if we move it forward onto the findings, okay? You will see here that post-event discussion distorts their memory. So in terms of the percentage of participants who recalled information they had not seen, when we've got post-event discussion, which was the experimental condition, 71% of participants reported seeing something that they did not see. In the no post-event discussion, or the control condition, 0% of participants reported seeing something that they didn't see. So the conclusion is that witnesses will often go along with one another, either to win social approval, which is just a form of compliance, or they genuinely believe that the other eyewitness is right and they are wrong, in which case that's memory internalisation. So this is what we were calling before memory conformity. So this is our landmark piece of research for the effects of PED, post-event discussion. We now need to just have a quick look at some of the research methods questions that we get in this area. So again, we've got an IV and a DV question. So what is the difference between the two conditions? I.e., I've already told you, what were one group allowed to do that the other one was not? And the DV, exactly what was recorded. Now, in order to do this, look back at the data table and it will give you your answer. Then we need to try and create a directional hypothesis. So a directional hypothesis should be clear in terms of what the difference is going to be between the two conditions, i.e., participants who are in the first condition will do better, worse, more or less, and at that point we refer to the dependent variable, than participants who are in the second condition. So if you've got the IV and the DV, absolutely spot on, that directional hypothesis should cause you no problems at all, okay? So if everybody just answers that question for me now, and then we'll resume in a second. Okay, that should have been enough time for you then to answer that question. Again, I've not given you the answer. Your teacher will test that with you on your assessment lesson. So now at this case, we've got the two studies, we've got the two definitions, and we're going to now move into the evaluation content. So the evaluation content in this area is really straightforward. You are all now over halfway through the AS material and you should be pretty good at writing an evaluation. First things first, one strength of the research is that it has got high reliability. So the research uses lab experiments and therefore uses standardised procedures. For example, now what you need to do for me here is you need to pick two things from the Loftus and Palmer study and two things from the Gabart study, which were kept the same for every single participant. And what you need to do is you need to write them into a short paragraph in this little space. I've given you one example. So in the Loftus and Palmer study, all participants watched the same video clip. So if you just pause me here and get that filled in, all right? So two things from each study, which were kept the same for all participants. So on to the conclusion then, what does that mean for the research? That means that this research is highly replicable, and that is shown if you Google Elizabeth Loftus. She has basically done research over the course of 40 years because all of her procedures are standardised and they have been replicated. All of her results are also consistent. Therefore, we can reliably, i.e. repeatedly, conclude that misleading information does distort eyewitness testimony. So that's our first strength. Really easy. I think you'll agree, okay? The next one that we're going to move on to is again a really straightforward strength in this area. The research, as I already said to you at the beginning of this little video tutorial, has got strong practical applications, okay? Now you already know that practical applications mean that it has a positive impact on some area of society or people's real lives. So what are the practical applications? Eyewitness testimony has been used to warn the justice system of problems with relying on eyewitness testimony. We know that research in this area has meant that we cannot no longer get a conviction based simply on an eyewitness testimony. Also, It's led to the development of what is known as the cognitive interview. Now you can see at the bottom of this screen, cognitive interview is the final thing that you're going to be doing on the memory topic area, and it's a way to reduce the effects of misleading information on an eyewitness recall, and it's regularly used by police officers. Okay, so this means the research can be praised because it's been used to improve the justice system no end, and it has also been used to reduce wrongful convictions. So there are two strengths then. So what about the weaknesses? One weakness that you'll already be familiar with is that lab experiments are exceptionally low in ecological validity. Why is this? It's because the situation of watching a video clip of a crime is artificial and is absolutely not the same as witnessing a crime in real life. Now you need to create a paragraph explaining why that is. So I've given you two little prompts here. Why is watching a video not the same? Which emotions would you be experiencing if you were actually to witness it in real life? What would happen to your memory if you were seeing the crime occur right in front of you? So most of you will be able to do that for yourselves. If however you can't, then notice I've put a little link at the bottom of this screen which will take you to Simply Psychology, and it'll give you a little short paragraph to go on. The conclusion for this point is that all of the research, because it's based on lab experiments and because it's got low ecological validity, it means that we can't generalise the information from these studies to real life crime scenarios, because misleading information might not distort eyewitness testimony in the same way in the real world. And then the final weakness, which is related to that point on ecological validity, is this idea that there are contradictory findings. So contradictory findings, most of you will already know, that means that the evidence is going against Elizabeth Loftus's original suggestion that misleading information makes the accuracy worse. The Ewell and Cuttrell study is one famous example of a piece of research that simply does not agree with Elizabeth Loftus. So Ewell and Cuttrell in 1986 investigated real-life witnesses to an armed robbery in Canada. Now, 4 months after the event, the witnesses were asked to recall details of the crime. However, the researchers at this point included two misleading questions to see whether or not they could distort the memory of the eyewitnesses. All witnesses were accurate. None of the original eyewitnesses were being influenced by the misleading information. Now, this particular example would be an example of a self-report. There are no conditions, so this is not necessarily an experiment at this point. Participants were simply being interviewed about their recall. So what can we conclude from this area? This means that leading questions may have less of an influence on real-life eyewitnesses than participants in well-controlled psychology experiments. So that then, guys, is the first part of eyewitness testimony. You've got research from Elizabeth Loftus and Palmer. You have got the research from Gabart. You've got the definitions of misleading information and post-event discussion. And we've also got the evaluation. So, what is best for you to do here at this stage is to have a go at filling in your A3 sheet. Try to do as much as you can, without looking back. Remember, you don't necessarily need all 4 evaluation points. You got to think realistically about how much you would be able to do in the 15-20 minutes that's allocated to you in the exam. The other thing that you can do is try having a go at completing the essay template. So discuss research into the effects of misleading information on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Now, just so you know, little exam tip here, when you are evaluating this research, it's all just methodology. So as long as you know what ecological validity is and what reliability is and what internal validity is, all you've got to be able to do is apply it to those studies. Now, in previous years, this has really helped my students because essentially They don't need to revise the evaluation. All they've got to do is revise the research studies. If you are good enough at research methods and those 3 specific areas of research methods, and you know that you are able to apply a stimulus in an exam situation, then that's it. Bob's your uncle. All you've got to learn is the practical application and the contradictory evidence. So now that's the end of this first video on the effects of misleading information. It would be wise really at this point for you to leave this information for a little while, deal with all the misleading information stuff first, and then come back to it, go onto Moodle, and then finish off with the stuff on anxiety. Okay.